This is Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance at the California Republican Party Convention in Burlingame, and we are joined by Matthew Harper. He is a member of the California State Assembly and an early supporter of U.S. Senator Ted Cruz for president. Very early.
Yes.
How early?
So early that in December, both I and Shannon Grove were the two first state legislators to endorse him in California.
That's remarkable, and I want to get a sense why. What was it about him that all the way back in December you said, I'm going to put my name on his endorsement list?
Well, I'm very fortunate to represent a part of Orange County that Republican presidential candidates like to come to, Newport Beach.
Okay, there you have it, done.
And so all of them basically do their early trial runs and see how they react with donors. And so I actually had the opportunity to meet most of the candidates who are auditioning for the donor folks in terms of raising money for their campaigns. And so I was able to see who matched up with how they really were on television or how they matched up on print versus in person. And so it really was a process of being able to figure out who matched my philosophy the most, and also someone who I think could take it all the way to the convention.
So what was it about him, though? I mean, you said it, philosophy, convention, but so often it's an intangible.
Yeah.
And so what was it? I watched his speech earlier. I want to get a sense from you why.
Well, the two candidates that were in the running were
for Matthew Harper.
For me, were both Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, as well as Ted Cruz of Texas. And I know, first of all, candidates with some political background, unless they've won a war, those are the folks that people vote for in a general election. Okay. So there's a few candidates that were
Dwight
off the
Eisenhower,
table initially. Yeah, basically have to win a war. Ulysses S. Grant, or of course George Washington himself. But in terms of folks who fit that category, I think those two folks told the most either philosophically consistent story or the most inspirational story. And it was kind of a tiebreaker between the two, and Ted Cruz is the one who really turned it because he really said the message right on and was able to articulate a conservative philosophy in a very presidential way.
So what was that message? What conservative philosophy did he articulate well? Because look, Mr. Rubio would say he's conservative, Mr. Kasich would say he's conservative, Mr. Trump would say he's conservative.
And I think he was able to argue the positions the best, and I think he was also able to say that he is the one who would be the most dependable. You know, we're going to probably have the next president decide 1, 2, or maybe 3 or 4 Supreme Court justices, and I have the most confidence that he'd pick ones that I'd like to see on the court.
What's interesting about Ted Cruz is no one really questions his intellect. That is, I don't care
Harvard.
I don't care what you say, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, we know he's a smart guy. But there are those with whom he works that have said things that are less than kind about him as a person, his personality. And I want to get a sense from you, because I know you've met him.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you're not in the same legislative body, but still, what would you say to those that have said less than kind things about the man personally?
Well, in terms of the ability to be able to connect with the crowd and be able to connect with voters, I think that he has that quality, and I've seen it in Iowa and also in other locations where I've seen him campaign very much directly.
What about connecting?
But I will say, in terms of other legislators he's served it, he's certainly gone against the grain in Congress. And I think a lot of Republican voters have been disappointed in Republican Congress's ability to be able to move the agenda forward, and his insistence on going, I think, a lot further and a lot harder than the others in Congress, I think are actually what voters are looking for. But I think there's members in Congress which are concerned with maybe what might be some one-upsmanship.
But what about as president? Because look, we have 3 co-equal branches of government, and it's all about the art of negotiation. And let's talk about the hero of the California Republican Party, Ronald Reagan. I mean, that was a negotiator. Whether you agree or disagree with him, he worked with Tip O'Neill, he worked with whoever the Democratic Senate leader was at the time. And those are 2 very different governance styles for different times. One of the things that we often think of Reagan is that he was a conservative leader, but he was one that had to compromise, because not only did he have a Democratic House in Congress the entire time he was president, but he also had to work with a Democrat legislature while he was governor of the state of California. But
if President Cruz wins, however, or if Cruz wins as president, it would very likely be with both a very heavily Republican House and a Republican Senate, and that I think is something that he would be able to lead in terms of his philosophy, because there is an ability to have a much more cohesive philosophically government than probably at any other time than we've had over the last 20 years.
But what if one of the branches flips? I mean, look, Ronald Reagan, very popular president. In 1986, the Senate went Democratic. You know, and so well, I'm just playing it out with you. You know,
and some of the things that you look at over time in terms of the House of Representatives, right now, California is a complete outlier. We have a Democrat as governor, we have a Democrat House, we have a Democrat
Senate. Let's talk about 2014.
Yeah.
In 2014, Republicans swept the whole nation in Congress, got to the Sierra Nevadas, all the close races for Congress went to the Democrats in California. Legislature did well for the Republicans. So we are an outlier.
And so that's the issue, is that in about 60% or more of the states, the Republicans have been very dominant. And those are who draw the lines the next time we have a census and a redistricting. And so the House is very unlikely to change in the near future. Maybe unless there's a Trump nomination, maybe that might change.
We'll talk about that.
Without major changes in the political dynamics of our country, I think Republicans will have the House and likely the Senate for a long time to come.
But you know what's interesting? I feel as if Americans like divided government. In a very perverse way, they seem to like when not all one party rules the roost.
Well, when you talk about the House of Representatives, the Democrats had it for decades,
They did.
all the way up until the 90s, and then there were a couple flips,
Right.
and now it looks like the Republicans are having that shift. But I will argue that I think you are right in that the voters like to switch between Republicans and Democrats after every couple of terms. They usually give, okay, you know, Reagan had a couple of terms.
But even legislatively, I mean, it seems as if the Democrat is the president, the Republicans start picking up seats. If the Republican's president,
That's true.
the Democrat starts picking up seats. Let's talk about
Barack Obama's been the best thing for Republicans in terms of winning legislative House and congressional seats.
Let's talk about Mr. Trump.
Yes.
Who is running very strong.
Yes.
Let us presume that he does well in California and marches to the nomination. Where does Assemblyman Matthew Harper go from here?
Now, I do think that's unlikely, because I think California's dynamics of a winner-take-all per congressional district do give some advantage to Cruz, depending on how competitive the race is by the time June comes around.
And I've heard Mr. Cruz has organized this state beautifully. And when you have you have 3 delegates per congressional district.
And in my local area, myself and Congressman Rohrabacher have been working with our volunteers to organize those Cruz volunteers. And I think that's going to be a big part of, in many parts of the state, is able to work when we're close.
Right.
Get those people out to vote that are our supporters.
But look, you're a thoughtful guy.
Yeah.
Let us presume that Mr. Trump is the nominee. Where does Matthew Harper go from there? Where does California go from there? Where does the California Republican Party go from there?
Well, I'm a strong Republican. I've been coming to these Republican conventions since I was a college Republican at USC. And so I will support the nominee, whoever the nominee is. This could be an interesting open convention, and so whichever the result ends up being. I think the matchup versus Hillary Clinton is a matchup that any Republican would want over these last several decades. I think she's the most weak candidate the Democrats will put up since George McGovern.
But are you concerned, though, about some of the rhetoric of Mr. Trump as it relates to Latinos, Muslims, women?
Donald Trump represents the most risk as a potential presidential candidate of any of the candidates that were in since we were having Iowa.
Right.
And so he does represent a significant amount of risk. And not only that, but as I said, when parties nominate someone who's never held elective office, or at least hasn't won a war, the last time the Republicans did that, his name was Wendell Willkie, and he won 10 states. That's it. It was a blowout.
You know a lot. You're a student of history, just like me. 2 history nerds, I have a feeling. His name is Matthew Harper. He is a member of the California State Assembly, representing significant portions of Orange County. We're in San Francisco today at the California Republican Party Convention. This is Charter Local Edition.